And speak to the retired U.S. Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. Mark, thanks so much for your time. What did you make of the evidence that was presented there by Turki al-Maliki?
Well, I think, first of all, they do have good forensic evidence on the ground in regards to the missile that they found. So they're going to be able to reverse engineer that. I think they're going to find significant evidence that this came from Iran. What I found interesting is he didn't mention some of the other intelligence which seems to be coming out open source. Perhaps some of the communications that were intercepted, and candidly the glaring open area that these missiles came through. The fact is that most of the air and missile defenses that the Saudi Arabians, and to that extent the Americans as well, are facing down towards the Houthis. So they had their backs uncovered, and they didn't have, as Joe Dunford would say, an unblinking eye covering Saudi Arabia. So forensic evidence, pretty obvious. Communications intelligence, they haven't talked about yet. And this whole notion about it had to come from an area that they weren't covering, that hasn't come out yet.
When attacks like this and missiles like this are fired across almost any part of the world, it's often American intelligence that gathers information and then passes it on to its allies. How much will the Americans and the Saudis be looking? They've already said that the trajectory was from the north. How close might they be to finding the point of origin, which is something that Maliki was pressed on by the media who are in attendance, saying, when are you going to be able to tell us where the point of origin of these attacks was? How difficult is that?
Well, I think it's very difficult. It's easy to see something coming in. You do have radars. You do have other forms of intelligence. You have satellite imagery, so on and so forth. But finding that point of origin is much more difficult if you don't, for example, have a satellite focused in that area. Obviously, we see North Korean missile launches because we're looking for more North Korean missile launches. So it may be either the case that they haven't found it yet and won't find it, or perhaps it's that President Trump and the Crown Prince are waiting to present it at the UN General Assembly next week. So that makes their arguments for UN action that much stronger.
Mark, what about the motivation here? Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, says the Americans are deceiving themselves because they simply can't believe, and neither can the Saudis, that the Houthis are finally fighting back against Saudi aggression in Yemen. But if the motivation for the Yemenis and the Houthis is there, what about for Iran? We understand what's happening with the Iran nuclear deal and the tensions that are rising, but what possible endgame could Iran have if Tehran is responsible and the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, as al-Maliki says, are behind these attacks? What can they gain from it?
Well, first of all, the Iranians have been very clear that if we can't sell our oil on the world market because of the sanctions, we're going to interrupt the supplies. Now, up to this point, we thought that interruption of supplies would be by blockading inside the Persian Gulf, going against the ships in the Persian Gulf, as we've seen. But this is a much more direct way of interrupting the flow of oil. The second, I think we've got to consider that this might indicate that there's a split between the moderates and the hardliners. The moderates, who up till a couple of weeks ago were starting to get interested in the noise coming out of President Trump about perhaps meeting at the UN General Assembly in the sidelines, and also the firing of John Bolton. So the hardliners may have had a motivation to keep this tension between the two countries, because if there is an agreement and there is an opening with the Iranians to stop their malign activities inside the region, it's certainly the IRGC who will take the brunt of that in terms of going against them and reducing their activities and their money sources.
Mark, we always appreciate your participation here on TRT World. Thank you so much. Mark Kimmitt speaking to us from Washington.